Hey, welcome back everybody to the Spring Deep Dive series where I take a holistic look at all 138 programs that make up the FBS level. We go ahead and dive into really talking about some of the notable movements that happen on this roster, as well as some other players to watch out for this upcoming season. Plus, on top of that, what I do like to do as well is I like to give my record prediction in terms of how things stand here in the spring time period. So, very excited to jump into what is ultimately going to be the 109th ranked team in college football going into this season. And I hope you guys are excited for it as well. If you are, you should go ahead and do a couple of things for me. Hit that like button and then also hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new to the channel on top of that. But I am very excited to get into what we got going on here today, though, that 109th ranked team. And that is actually going to be the Toledo Rockets, who we saw this during the Jason Candle era. Has been a team the last couple of years that's been one of the higher power rated teams in the MAC, but just haven't found a way to win and get to Detroit at a high enough clip, so to speak. But a brand new era does end up kicking off, though, right? Because Jason Candle does leave to take the head coaching job for the UConn Huskies. And now it is going to be a brand new era in Toledo football in Mike Jacobs, who comes over from a successful tenure at Mercer. You know, Mercer being one of the best FCS programs at that particular level of football. And so Mike Jacobs will be responsible in terms of at least maintaining the level of play that's been seen. And there was a fair number of roster turn, starting with the guys that are going to be projected out to go to the NFL. And it's not just Emmanuel McNair Warren who is going to be heading off to the NFL at this point. He's likely going to be a first round pick, so there's going to be a fair amount of attention to him. At least that's what it looks like as of the recording of this video. But a couple other players that are leaving for the NFL as well. Andre Fuller, who is another defensive backfield member, is going to be a tough loss as well. And then their lead running back, Chip Trayanum, does end up declaring for the NFL draft as well. So multiple NFL guys that Toledo is going to have to replace for the next season. And it's really going to go down to what essentially some of these players that were brought in from the Mercer program, how do they end up turning out in terms of how successful of a season does Toledo football end up being in the 2026 campaign, right? Because it's not just the fact that they lost a few guys to the NFL, right? Which is a lot of NFL players for a G5 program. But it's also they lost a couple of players to UConn when Jason Candle left to go take that job as well. It's Ajon Carter and Kayvon Sherman, two key defensive pieces last year for this Toledo Rockets defensive front seven that are also going to be a part of UConn moving forward as Jason Candle looks to maintain what has been a really good last couple of years under Jim Mora. But then it's also losing a few other guys to the power conference ranks as well that were part of that defensive side of the football. Malachi Davis, for example, who was one of the key edge rushers on this Toledo defense last year. He had 5.5 sacks. He ends up transferring to Rutgers. So that they're going to have to figure out how to replace some edge rushing talent. They also lose the Chris Dapolona to Syracuse as well. He had a pretty nice season for the Rockets last season with 68 tackles. And then Braden Alls, who was a ball hawk for Toledo last season, he ended up with 5 interceptions last fall, ends up with a offer to go and play for Iowa State this upcoming season. So definitely some concerns and some holes that they do need to fix. But in spite of that, I still don't think that it's going to be rough across the board, even though I do have Toledo maybe a little bit lower than what I normally have had the last couple of seasons. Like, for example, I think at running back, I think they're going to be okay with CJ Miller transferring in. He had nearly 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns. Most importantly, he comes from that Mercer program, so he understands what Mike Jacobs wants to run. So that continuity in terms of being under the same system, but just wearing a slightly different uniform, I think that's going to be pretty big as we see some continuity in that running back room. wide receiver actually could have a slight chance in terms of being a little bit better than what it was last year. They brought in two very intriguing wide receivers. One, obviously, from Mercer, which is where Mike Jacobs come from, because J. Dabbs had a nice year for the Mercer Bears, and he's now part of his team. But speaking of Bears, Southeast Missouri State transfer Calvin Gilbert is also joining this Toledo squad as well. 650 yards and 7 touchdowns. But then it's also going to come down to those FCS implants that are going to have to step in and have a meaningful impact as well. You know, Andrew Zock, the edge rusher for the Mercer Bears, or Julian Fox at linebacker. And then how about Caleb Hutchinson, who was getting some buzz going into the transfer portal window? We'll see if he can live up as a potential breakout option as well. They do also add a Cam Jones out of Holy Cross, who was more of a slot corner for the Crusaders last season. He had 59 total tackles for Holy Cross last year. Didn't have a really like a significant number of interceptions. I don't think he had any interceptions, but that doesn't automatically make you a bad coverage DB. But primarily focus on tackling, so they got themselves a nice little corner there as well. I do think that the offensive line is also going to be okay in spite of losing Anthony Boswell to the transfer portal too. He ends up leaving for Houston, but their other interior offensive lineman, their other guard, and Ethan Spoth, well, he was a second team all conference guy for Toledo and is staying with the Rockets even with this coaching change. So that's a big boost for Mike Jacobs' offensive line going into this year. Special teams also could be sneaky good as well. We returned Bryson Hammer, who didn't contribute much like on the actual offense and defensive side of things, but in special teams, he was a really good punt returner, a third team all conference guy as well. So multiple all conference players are back on this roster. I do have a little bit of a concern of the interior defensive line. I do think run defense is going to be a little bit of an issue this upcoming season, but I do think that the Mercer guys are going to step in, and I think they're going to do a pretty good job, especially with understanding my Jacob system already. So that's a big driver in terms of Toledo being 109 and not having them lower in spite of the number of guys that they lost in the transfer portal, as well as on top of that, losing those guys to the NFL as well. But hey, let's go ahead and take a look at the schedule to see what we think this Toledo team is going to be capable of. And it's because that I do really like Mike Jacobs. I think he's going to do a good job as well. I don't think there's going to be this dramatic drop off, right? Because I do believe in Mike Jacobs, and I also believe in the overall infrastructure of the Toledo program as well. You can see up in the upper left hand corner that I do have Toledo as a top 65 program. And for me, this is the second best program in this conference, only behind the Miami Redhawks. And that's just courtesy of Miami has more coaching stability, so that was a driver in terms of how the program ranking worked. And I think that's going to serve them well because I think there is a couple of games that I think, even though Toledo is going to be an underdog, that in spite of that, I still think that they're going to win those games even as a underdog, because that is the level of trust that I have in this program as of right now. So I really like their chances in terms of actually beating Temple. That game being at home, KCQ are still trying to build up that infrastructure up in terms of what's been a doormat program like over the years prior to him arriving. They have been competitive last year. But KCQ are certainly at least a year or two away in terms of having more safe games under his tutelage. And then how about Western Michigan at home as well? I think that's a sneaky game for to keep an eye on with how good of a coach Mike Jacobs in. Because remember, we have seen historically in this conference, we have not seen a repeat champion in a long time. In Western Michigan, they are coming off as the defending champions of this conference. So history does suggest that Western Michigan will take a little bit of a step back, not a dramatic one, but I do think there's going to be a little bit of a step back in place there. Now, a couple of games on the schedule that I'm looking at, and just straight up, I just don't think that they're going to win. This is a Michigan State game. I've been going into Michigan State, and even though it's a rough one in Lansing right now, Fitzgerald's going to have his work cut out for him. I do think that Michigan State still wins that game comfortably, and then San Diego State, even though it was a cross-country road trip for the Aztecs, I still think that Sean Lewis has a far superior football team right now. So I have a hard time seeing them win those two games. But after that, it's really quite a few competitive games on this list. You know, the benefit of UMass and Bowling Green at home, which is nice. And then in terms of other games that they have that are a little bit more of those competitive matchups. You know, Ohio on the road is a big one because we do see a little bit of a new coaching matchup between Jaws Hauser as well as Mike Jacobs as well. And then some of the other teams that they have are going to go up against on the road outside of Ohio. That's the toughest road test. But then the few other games that they have in conference play on the road, it's against teams that are going to be in the lower half of this conference. You know, we already talked about Ball State. We already talked about Sacramento State as well, being kind of in that lower quadrant of the MAC. Eastern Michigan might be the best out of those three teams that I mentioned, but again, Eastern Michigan, really good coaching staff, but not that great of a football team on paper, albeit I think they're a little bit better than last year. But I say all this just to say that I think Toledo does have a somewhat navigable schedule going into this year, just looking at things from a holistic standpoint. I actually think that it's actually their strength of schedule is certainly falling in the bottom half. I have them ranked as the ninth toughest schedule in this conference. So lots of space for Mike Jacobs to work with in terms of to figure out who he is during the non-conference play and then really ramp things up when you get into Maction. So there really is a world in place where, we do see Toledo under Mike Jacobs go to Detroit. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's going to concretely happen. I think it's going to come down to that Ohio game at the very end of the year. But I think that Toledo, even though they start out ranked outside the top 100, I do think that they are going to be that type of football game that is going to find themselves in the mix to go to Detroit at the end of the season. So that's what I currently have as my read on the Toledo Rockets right now. And I'm just curious to hear what you guys think down in the comment section below. Am I too high or too low on Toledo? Definitely let me know in that comment section. I do try to read all of your comments. If you've been enjoying the First Look series here on YouTube, definitely hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well. If you do happen to be brand new to the channel, because it does take a lot of work to do these breakdowns for all 138 programs, so that love would be genuinely appreciated from the bottom of my heart. But hey, with that, this is Jake from College Football Red Zone signing off. Hoping you guys are all out there having a good one. Take care, everybody.